to conclude this spring season by finally delving into one of the seediest, most underhanded subgenres in the history of media. Edutainment! Maybe it's still as big nowadays, but back in the 80s and 90s, many entertainment companies tried to get around the hell and lovejoys that wanted to control children's entertainment by coming up with cartoons, games, and other forms of media that were intended to secretly teach the little kiddies what they wouldn't listen to in class. This was done through computer games about westward expansion, where mostly kids learned about the horrors of dysentery, or cartoon weirdos spouting out nonsensical songs about nations and capitals in between their ridiculing of celebrities. Or taking a classic storybook series and making it a cartoon fast-forwarded 300 years into the future. Yeah, I'm still not too sure what they were going for there. But if you were a grade schooler back in the late 80s to early 90s, chances are at some point you were introduced to a little series that's basically what happens when you combine Mad Max with Sesame Street. Tomes and Talismans was a 13-episode miniseries created around 1985 to 86 by the Mississippi Department of Education, mainly for distribution on public television and in-school use. Yeah, there was actually a time when the Deep South states actually cared about public education. The purpose of the series was to teach kids all about the usefulness and importance of public libraries by teaching it within a post-apocalyptic sci-fi adventure story. I assume you just now came back from pausing the video to try and process what I just said. Dare to delve further? Let's get started. The series begins at the turn of the 22nd century, where Earth is suffering from horrific air pollution and overpopulation, so really not much has changed. And this somehow led to them being colonized by an alien race called the Wipers, who love to destroy and disrupt communication technology because I guess they were fed up with how much they had to level up to play their favorite MMO's biggest quests. At any rate, the Earthlings decided to leave the planet to completely escape the Wipers. The first episode's plot actually begins in the year 2123, where the final evacuations are occurring, save for a handful of people who are finalizing the completion and storage of an underground library of all Earth information in the hopes people one day may return. No small task there. They had to clear 3 acres of cavern just for the romance novels alone. By the way, there are a bunch of hints in just these first 3 minutes that the Earth had been consolidated into a single world order with one government and one newspaper. But fortunately, the writers didn't spend any time trying to get political and blame that for humankind's destruction. They were too busy telling people about the Dewey Decimal System.
Melville Dewey invented the Dewey Decimal System precisely to help people find the books they're looking for.
The books about the history of the Wipers on Earth, shouldn't they be over in fiction?
No. I want all the history books about Wipers to stay on the non-fiction shelves at 909. That's where they belong, according to the Dewey Decimal System. 900 through 999 are the call numbers for history and geography.
So this first episode centers around these people, led by Miss Bookhart here.
What kind of stupid name is that?
Adding the final details of the library when disaster is discovered. One book, Volume 3 of the History of Wipers on Earth, has gone missing.
I thought you and the others who were here checked those shelves days ago.
Well, they must have overlooked it, and now everyone is at the evacuation site, and I can't find the book anywhere.
This is a calamity that must be fixed in the eyes of Miss Bookhart, because no way can she escape to the safety of another galaxy without the important mission of her precious library being complete. Okay, for what it's worth, they are needing to find a reference book that specifically talks about humankind's worst enemy, which would be pretty important should another race eventually come to Earth and try to find a way to fight back against them. Probably not important to the plot, though. It is funny how Bookhart's two assistants here have to completely tell each other over and over again how the card catalog system works, as if they could never remember despite being library employees.
We don't know the author, so we can't look for author cards. We don't know the title, so we can't look for title cards.
But we do know the subject. We can look for the subject cards.
Suddenly, those fourth wall gags from 80s cartoons, when they say, "I'm not telling you, I'm telling the audience," make a lot more sense. Anyway, no one is able to find the book in the library before they are all ordered into the final evacuation, save for Miss Bookhart, whose bookmobile breaks down in the middle of nowhere as she was out searching for someone who may have taken the book. And you better believe she was gonna make sure that person would have paid his late fees. It's here that she encounters this creepy guy known as the Universal Being, because Mr. Plot Device did not go over well with the focus groups. He puts her under this sleep spell just as the last of other humans are beamed away, likely to never return again, ending the first episode. And all the dolphins celebrate because now they have all the fish they can eat. Episode 2 jumps forward 100 years exactly. Funny how everything always happens on a big round number like that. Where Earth is now occupied by a second alien race called the Users, a more technologically advanced species that are indeed said to be longtime foes of the Wipers. You know, maybe it's just me, but was it really a good idea for them to set up a communications base on a planet they should know is inhabited by their nemesis, who are known for disrupting communications? Hope that doesn't come back to bite them in the ass or anything. And yes, despite them being much more advanced, they find it hard to decipher the difference between fiction and non-fiction, as indicated when a number of the younger users discover books left behind by the Earthlings, including, oh, what a coinky-dink!
The print in these bound paper sheets is readable, just as it is on the display terminal. But the words remain affixed to the sheets of material. They never disappear. It's permanent.
It's primitive. These so-called books do not allow for instant information access like this.
I also love how when they are reading Cinderella, they directly reference the mouse Gus, who was not in the original story, only the Disney version.
These are not facts. Could some human have invented this story?
Not true information?
It's here the kids discover through their information computers about the existence of libraries, and so they must embark on a grand quest to find this lost source of info on the ancient civilizations. Sorry, Onward was the last movie I got to see in theaters. By the way, the eldest boy among these younger users is named Athos, the younger white girl is Abacus, the black girl is Varian, and the pudgy one is Lidar. They find the bookmobile and the sleeping Miss Bookhart inside, and it's here the Universal Being decides to show up again with some of the most cryptic clues imaginable as how to wake her.
Specific knowledge must be retrieved from a book of powerful gifts. The first, the unconscious, will release. A memory of clouded victory follows. Hold an ancient charm to the beam. Speak the name of power as the four children in the story invented by E. Nesbitt.
Are we sure Roberta Williams didn't write this script?
Nobody can continue to live in a land and in a time not appointed, said the voice of glorious sweetness. But a soul may live if in that other time and land there be found a soul so akin to it as to offer it refuge.
I think she's awakening.
How are you?
I guess it could be worse. He could have made them recite Jabberwocky.
Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, and the claws that catch.
This leads into episode 3, where Bookhart brings the user kids to the underground library where...
looks like a bomb hit.
They have to put all the books back together, which is used in order to explain how books are assembled. But while all that goes on, the Wipers attack, destroying the user's transmission tower off camera, and then putting the base literally in Thunderdome. No one enters! No one leaves!
We are being held captive by the Wipers' one and only invention, the magnetic shield.
Man, it's like setting up shop on a planet your arch enemies had already conquered was a really dumb idea. The only other user on the outside is Aphos and Abacus's father, Commander Holen, who escaped the transmission tower but is now lost and unable to locate the library because his dumbass son dropped his navigation computer earlier. This is so Buckhart can educate the users and thus the viewers on maps, as well as explaining the card catalog system even further. And at least it makes more sense here, since it's being told to a bunch of Mork from Orc rejects, and not a couple of humans who forget vital parts of their jobs every 5 minutes. I'm starting to realize why the Wipers were able to take over the planet so easily. Speaking of the Wipers, it's near the end of episode 4 where we learn the first vital piece of info on them. They have some type of superstition regarding horses. Unfortunately, we can't get more details on that because that information is in, you guessed it, The History of Wipers on Earth Volume 3, which is back at the Entrapped user base. Episode 5 begins with Guess Who making another appearance and handing Colonel Holen a scroll containing a list of numbers and even more vague clues.
Victory lies within the system that divides all that is into 10.
To elide the buckler, these tomes offer succor.
Isn't it great how there are all these mystical beings out there who seem to have unlimited power, and yet all they do is make mortals do all the dirty work and just give vague instructions along the way? Insert your own religion joke, I ain't touching that with a 40,000-foot pole. Buckhart determines through the numbers and how they are clearly from the Dewey Decimal System that they must find 10 books that each contain clues and hints as to how they can beat the Wipers. These books include Bullfinch's Mythology, the complete works of Shakespeare, and of course, The History of Wipers on Earth Volume 3. If only the writers had been smart enough to suggest that book had been written by a guy named MacGuffin. These next 4 episodes are pretty much all about them using the books they have to determine they need to get a hold of a laser, a ruby, and a horse in order to construct something that will blow the dome. While Miss Buckhart goes on explaining the uses of dictionaries, encyclopedias, and what a watermelon is.
Where do we get a ruby? Where can we find a laser?
Where will we get a horse? Even when we learn the meaning of the parts, they make no sense as a whole.
But we don't have all the parts, and we may be left with a lot of parts and no whole unless we can read Volume 3 of the History of Wipers on Earth.
But it's at the base. We can't communicate with the base.
I should point out that while all of this has been going on, the series has been cutting every so often to the Wipers themselves and their apparent plans to wipe out the users for good. So, is this contingent of what looks like a dozen Wipers tops, their entire force running their entire operation from this one old warehouse? It was really just a small handful of them that drove the entire human race off the planet completely? If not, are there other Wiper bases anywhere else on the world? Or is this just the last of them because the others died out in the last 100 years? Which would mean humanity could probably have their planet back if they just waited out an eventual Wiper extinction? It's been a long time since I've had to go to this old gag, but...
It just raises too many questions.
The main story pretty much stalls up until episode 9, when Abacus learns about the sewer systems in the area and thus sneaks out and uses said sewers in order to get inside the user base from underground so she can get the History of Wipers book. Her grandmother and leader of the users also conveniently gives them this pendant containing the biggest ruby in the known universe. So no one else among the users knew she had that before now? Abacus uses the ruby to save Colonel Holan from a group of Wipers somehow, and they get their laser blaster in the process before they all reunite at the library, where they are finally able to discover what they are supposed to do with all of this crap.
When the Wipers marched onto the battlefield, they could see no users. Loud thunder sounded, and they looked toward the sky. But it was clear except for one single cloud hanging over a nearby hill. Suddenly, a large shadow in the shape of a strange creature fell across the cloud. The shadow creature possessed the head and arms of a soldier and the body of a Clomont.
They need to construct a laser-generated hologram onto a cloud that will simulate a horse-bound warrior with the ruby talisman that was instrumental in the user's ancestors defeating the Wipers in a great battle many years ago on another world, or something like that. In it, the Wipers were scared away due to the warrior speaking a great word of power, which, thanks to another cryptic clue from the universal being, they discover was Athenaeum, which was the ancient Greek word for library. Get it? Knowledge is power! But they use the word library instead of power, so Schoolhouse Rock can't accuse them of plagiarism. They record the image and audio they need to project, and the 13th and final episode has Bookhart and the users making it up to the top of the hill they must be on to make the projection, but in the middle of their trek...
One last tome. A written report with sources complete. Rely on research, wisely concluded. Its power triumphs.
Did he just give them the script of the series? Really, the book he gives them is a whole synopsis of just what they all went through for this entire series. Was this all your doing, Universal Being? Did you make all of this happen just so you could write a damn novel about it? Geez, and Greek mythology said Zeus was a prick to humans. Anyway, they make it to the top and project the image of the man on the horse with the ruby. They play a tape of the word of power, and this causes all the Wipers to flee, and the dome just disappears. And destroying the dome somehow causes a vortex to open up that sucks in all the Wipers and scatters them across the galaxy. Just like that. Most unepic final battle ever. As Bookhart and the users celebrate by eating watermelon together, they get a transmission from the descendants of Earthlings saying they're ready to return home now that others have done the dirty work for them, and the series ends with the oh-so-hopeful message of the beginning. Sadly, there was no funding available for the sequel series, where Miss Bookhart and Commander Holan teach the user kids about the birds and the bees. What can I say about this series? It's not exactly children's television workshop production. A lot of the acting is borderline community theater quality. The actual story is riddled with plot holes, and often at times the lessons they're trying to teach seem really forced into said story. A lot of that can be forgiven due to it clearly being a public access production, I suppose. And it does do what it's meant to do in its own ham-fisted way. If there's one thing I will give the series credit for, it is impressive to see how much it did predict the future. Nowadays, we have the vast, easily accessible, computer-generated source of information, much like the users possessed. But we still have hard copies in the form of books, tapes, and optical discs as well, and there's almost a rivalry as to which is the better option. Personally, I believe they all have their uses and are essential in today's world, and watching this series over has given me the curiosity to return to my local library one day to see how much entities like the card catalog and Dewey Decimal System are still used. And perhaps a series like this, even in its ridiculous form, should be shared once again to show newer generations how important libraries and public access to books and other sources of education and information truly are. For one, certainly want the next inhabitants of this planet to be able to experience the greatness of Gordon Corman. See you next time on TV Trash.